Good morning. I ran into a shepherd. I don't see him now, but he's here. I saw him this morning. He's from the Baldwin Church of Christ in Fayetteville. Thank you. I can't see you. Thank you, Lance. And that's where I was speaking last week. Not a job interview, anything like that. They have a great preacher, and he was off at a workshop, I believe, out of town. And so I filled in from him and went there last October just to give him a break. So we've kind of developed a neat little relationship, a great church up there, and it was good to run into Lance this morning. Kind of out of place, wasn't expecting him here. Charles Ingalls and his wife Carolyn used to come into my living room for about an hour every single week when I was a kid. And most of you know who I'm talking about. There were good moral lessons from this show, Little House on the Prairie. That was back when people would say, oh, those are the good old days. TV was good then. You could get a lesson in an hour or even a 30-minute show. It was different, but what was interesting to me is no matter the dilemma that Charles Ingalls' family faced, if he was dealing with a family issue or if he was dealing with the townspeople or Nellie Olson, her family, if he was dealing with them, he was always kind and courteous. And if you remember his kids, they would say yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and thank you. All of those foreign phrases. Because Charles and Carolyn instilled that into their kids. And so today I'm asking whatever happened to the Ingalls family in being kind and courteous? Kind means this: having a good, benevolent nature, being considerate or helpful. Courteous is this: having or showing good manners. It means being polite. I was raised to be polite, to use good manners. It's not, we would appreciate you to say yes, sir, and no, sir. It was, you better. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. And no, ma'am, and thank you. A mailman in Little Rock was delivering a package recently. And see, here's the interesting thing. These gentlemen and ladies that deliver our mail, they don't know everybody's names on their route. That'd be a lot of people to know. But they look at the address. Well, he was looking at the apartment number because he happened to be delivering a package to an apartment number. And as he walked by this one apartment, he noticed that a lady was standing at her door and another lady was visiting. So there were two ladies visiting at a door. And he didn't think anything about it because that wasn't the correct number. He went down about 2 or 3 or 4 more doors and noticed, okay, here's the number. And he begins to knock. And the lady said, you should have spoke. He kind of looked around and didn't think anything about it. And he started knocking. And the lady said, you should have spoke. And he turned and he said, pardon me? And she said, you should have spoke. And he's thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, oh, is this your package? And she said, yeah, you should have spoke. And he said, I apologize, ma'am. Would you please sign for this? And she said, you should have spoke. And he said, ma'am, I don't know your name. I only know the address, so I went to the address. Rude is what that is. Rude. And that's the times we live in. Ever let someone into traffic and you can't even get a wave? You can't even get a thank you. You're saying, oh, you're building on this, Chuck. You're making this far more important than it really is. You can't do this. My buddy Trey Morgan posted this week 10 things that are cool. Listen, saying thank you. Apologizing when you're wrong. That's a foreign concept. Giving a compliment. Being nice to strangers. Listening without interrupting. Do I need to repeat that one? My wife's going, yeah, I wish you would. Listening without interrupting. Admitting you were wrong. Tipping generously. Paying for someone's coffee, learning and using people's names, and holding doors open for others. You ever hold the door and that person walks through like they're the king or the queen and you're supposed to do that? Yeah. It's rude. You can't say thank you? I'll be honest. I'll be real honest. There are times I feel a lot like this guy. Yeah. I mean, coming out of the hospital and you hold the door, that's not a hospital, and somebody walks out like, I'm the queen, you should do that. You kind of want to go grab them and say, we're going to do this again. You can't say thank you. Meet me in Ephesians 4. Sometimes lessons are not about being about theological depth. Sometimes they're about going to spring training. Baseball players go to spring training every year, and it's about making sure our fundamentals are sound. It's about getting back to the basics. And I think sometimes in the church, we need to get back to the basics, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some fundamental things that I think are really important, because our goal every day when we go out, if it's to work, to school, in the community, whatever we're doing should be about people seeing Jesus in us. So we're going to go back to some basics this morning. First of all, being kind and courteous should be automatic for Christians. It should be a no-brainer. It should just be us. A little short putt on the golf course, and most of the times they're going to say, hey, that's a gimme. Pick it up. You don't have to putt that. That's a gimme. Well, I'm going to tell you, when it comes to being kind and courteous, that's a gimme for Christians. We should just be that. Galatians 5:22 talks about the fruit of the Spirit. And we say, yeah, that's love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. Kindness is the next one mentioned. This idea, this character quality of kindness should be present in you and in me. And listen, kindness is not something that you practice based on the kind of day you're having. Kindness is not something that you practice based on the kind of mood you're in. Well, I'm having a pretty good day today, so I think I'll be nice. I'll say thank you, or I'll say, yes, sir, or whatever the case is. No, you should be kind and courteous no matter what. It should just be an automatic because of who your father is. That's how it was when I was growing up. If I didn't say yes, sir, and my parents were around, I knew then I didn't want to go home. Because it was serious. While you're saying, you're making a big deal of this. It was a big deal then. The problem is it's not a big deal today. We should be kind and courteous because of who our Father is. Ephesians 4, just listen. Listen to what the words Paul shares with the church at Ephesus when he says, I want you to be kind, verse 32. It's up there for you anyway. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. But I want you to be kind to one another. And it's interesting how he mentions kindness and then also forgiveness in the very same verse. Are you troubled by that? Maybe there's a link that says forgiving others is kind. So I don't want to forgive. Maybe there are times you don't feel like being kind either, but that's what you should be as God's child. It should be automatic. We should be kind to others. Paul driving this point home to the church at Ephesus and in Colossians 3. In verse 12, a very similar passage to what we just read. Put on then as God's chosen ones, as Christians, God's holy people, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. And then he would go on and say, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord is forgiving you, so you must also forgive. So he continues to tie forgiveness in with kindness. There's got to be a link there. But what I want you to see in the flyover passage, because that's probably what those two are, he says, I want you to be kind to one another. You think, we shouldn't have to preach this. We shouldn't have to talk about this. This should be, it should be an automatic. It should be an automatic thing. Being kind to people we know, or even strangers, not a difficult thing to do. Being courteous by saying thank you, by saying good morning, by saying hello, not a difficult thing to do. But think about this. As Christians, you represent God. And we don't realize, sometimes we could go a lifetime and not realize the impact our kind actions, our kind words, or just being polite. We don't know the impact those things make, but I'll tell you this, when you're rude, when you're impolite, when you're not kind, we see the impact that makes. I mean, God forbid, but I assure you, when I'm out and about, when I'm in the community and someone's had a run-in with a church member, I promise you, I hear about it. I promise you. Well, I'm going to tell you what, that person, they were so rude. And that might have been a complete misunderstanding taken way out of context, but I assure you they want to tell me. And it's happened. It's happened. So this idea, when we're not polite, when we're not kind, it affects the church. We're representing God. We're representing one another as the Lord's church. And here's the thing before we move on. Rude, impolite Christians never encourage the unchurched to attend church. You can write that one down. Never are you going to meet someone and say, well, that person was so rude. And they attend where? I'd like to join them. That never happens. We're encouraged. We're attracted to those that are kind, those that are friendly, those that are loving, those that are polite. We remember those who are rude. We remember those that aren't kind. I'll never forget, many, many years ago, a shepherd in the congregation in a very small town, a long time ago, his business dealings were a little shady. I'm just going to say it like that. I didn't know that because I didn't deal with him in business. But you know how we fight with people in the community? They say, he's one of your shepherds. He's a leader? Uh-huh. Well, let me tell you this. Let me tell you about this. And you say, well, what does that have to do with anything? How you act, how I act affects this whole entire congregation. How people view us and look at us, because when one person is rude, they say, boy, I tell you what, I know they go to Cabot Church of Christ, and I'm going to tell you what, she's rude or he's not friendly. It reflects every single one of us. And this idea of being kind and courteous should be an automatic for Christians. Let's move on. Secondly, turn to Philippians 2. Let's spend a few minutes here. I like this text. Secondly, being kind and courteous requires us to put others first. Got to think about the other guy. And that's not natural. That's not even real normal for us. I mean, we've got to make a conscious effort to put the other person first, because when I put the other person first, I'm putting myself behind them. And what I'd really like to do, if I'm honest, is always put myself first. Because I know what I want, I know what I like, I know the way I like it. But because I belong to Him, the message is you need to put the other people first. You say, who? All of them. Philippians 2, starting in verse 1 with me. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from His love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being one of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Want this unity. Listen. Drives home this point. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Put the other guy first. Think about his needs before yours. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. I don't know what your prayers sound like. I don't know where you go in your prayers. But I can tell you, I know you're praying for the sick, and I know you're praying for those that are expecting children, and I know you're praying for things like that, and that's fantastic. We should. I do too. But there's a part of my prayer that I think we should probably all ascribe to, and it's this. God, just make me more like Jesus every day. You say, that's pretty basic and fundamental. I'm a pretty basic and fundamental guy, and I know I need to be more like him. Okay? Verse 5 says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ. If our attitude, if we're to be more like Jesus, we're going to put the other people first. And Jesus is the prime example of this. Verse 6, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, setting deity aside, by taking the form of a servant. Talk about moving to the other side of the tracks, right? You've heard that expression. Well, they lived in a fantastic neighborhood, and things went south for them financially, and they had to move to the other side of the tracks. Jesus moved to the other side of the tracks. I mean, could you imagine leaving the splendor of heaven and then coming here? And that's what he did. Set deity aside, came here. Now listen, he's done this, putting you first, himself last. But he emptied himself, verse 7, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in a human form, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. A criminal, not just death, but a criminal's death. Putting you first and me first. If he puts himself first, we sing this song, he could have called, how many angels is it? 10,000 angels. He could have called 10,000 angels. If he puts himself first, he calls 10,000 angels. And he gets out of the cross. But he doesn't put himself first. The ultimate example of putting us first by taking our sins to the cross. And see, this morning we're not talking about you and me dying for someone. We're talking about putting others first by being kind and courteous. You ever go through the drive-thru and you're pulling through there and you must be in a good mood because you look in your rearview mirror and you're going, I'm going to pay for theirs too. And you do it. You're putting them first. You don't know them. And even if you do know them, you're still putting them first. That's being kind. When we seek to put others first every day, we will be kind. We will be courteous to others. And from serving the needs of others to being kind, it begins with putting other people first. The cashier at the store, the stranger we pass. I want to be like Jesus. And that means I'm going to be kind and courteous. Listen, even to those who aren't kind and courteous to me. I'll hit more on that in a minute. So I'm walking into a restaurant Friday at lunch. I was going to meet my wife for lunch. I'm walking in, and as I'm walking in, a guy's walking this way, so we're going to intersect. And you see someone walking, you look at him, and he was looking at me like he knew me. And I was looking at him like I didn't know him. and he kept looking. He said, hey, how you doing? Like he knew me. It wasn't, hey, how you doing? Just being polite. And I said, oh, hey. And I have no idea right now who he is still. I said, hey, how you doing? He said, man, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going in to have some lunch with my wife, and I'm headed back to the office. All right, well, hey, good to see you too. I'm glad I saw you today. And as I think about that, I don't know who he was. I'm not sure. I even asked my wife, you do that thing in the restaurant, we're like, hey, don't look now. But who's that guy in the corner over there? Why do you want to know? Because I don't know who he is, and he's really talking to me. I think he knows me, and I don't know who he is. But friendly, kind. He was so kind. I don't know who he is, but I was going to be kind to him. If he'd stopped and shook my hand and talked, we'd have had a conversation. Kind. I'm going to be kind and courteous. Put the other person before yours. Let's move on. Last of all this morning, let's go to Luke 6 and spend a few minutes there, and then we're going to wrap up. Luke 6. Being kind and courteous is treating others the way you want to be treated. Luke 6. Jesus' sermon, powerful text. The golden rule. Do unto others, this is how I learned it, as you would have them do unto you. I learned it 40 years ago in kindergarten. And you're saying, you just saying that? No, I remember learning that in kindergarten. What I didn't know then was that this teaching, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, came from the Bible. I didn't know that. Most of this teaching that Jesus teaches here in Luke 6:27 and following is pretty countercultural. In other words, the culture, the times, the people are not going to go for this. This is completely opposite of the way we think and our mentality. Notice what he says. Verse 27 and following, I say to you who hear, love your enemies. You lost me at enemies, right? Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. What? Bless those who curse you. I don't think so. Pray for those who abuse you, possibly. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes away from your goods, do not demand them back. Completely counter-cultural, probably then and definitely today. Because we're looking at this going, I'm not going to love my enemies. We're warring with our enemies. I'm thinking, those that hate me? Really? Bless those that I mean, this is completely the opposite of what you and I are absorbing and teaching and practicing. In other words, culture then, culture now doesn't embrace or teach these teachings. But then in verse 31, you find a teaching that absolutely was powerful then, and it's still powerful today. And even learning it 40 years ago, it's still important today. In verse 31, when he says, and as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. What's he saying? Treat people the way you want to be treated. Treat people the way everybody in here wants to be treated with kindness. Everybody in here wants to be treated with respect. Everybody in here wants people to be polite. And Jesus says, just treat people the way you want to be treated. We tell the little kids, hey, you need to share that toy. If you'll share, then they'll share with you. And in essence, we're passing along the principle to the kids that if you'll be nice to your friends, they'll be nice to you. We're passing along that principle. And according to Jesus, this cross-generational teaching applies to all of us, all generations. If you want people to be kind, if you want people to be courteous, then you treat them with kindness and courtesy. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Deep theologically? I knew I wouldn't drown you this morning. And that wasn't the intent. Challenge you? I hope. Because when you have the opportunity to speak, when you have the opportunity to be kind, someone you know, someone you're not sure you know, whatever, I hope you'll be kind. I hope you'll be courteous. I hope we're teaching our kids to be polite. I got to be honest, I don't like it when they call me Mr. Ball. I'm like, who is that? But I will tell you this, when they say yes, sir, and no, sir, and thank you, and I appreciate that, sir, and things like that, that makes an impact. That makes an impact. Because I know they've been taught that. I was taught that. Listen, you want people to see Jesus in you, and that's really what it's about. You want people to see Jesus in you. Be kind and courteous no matter what. Listen, don't treat people the way they treat you. Treat people with kindness and courtesy. A lot of times we treat people the way they treat us, and we say, well, they're rude, so I'm going to be rude to them. Well, they didn't speak to me, so I'm not going to speak to them. And I think that's the mentality. And see, that mentality, very wrong, it's not biblical. We're teaching that to the younger people. So don't treat people the way they treat you. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Be kind and courteous to all others, no matter how they treat you. This morning, we're going to leave in a little bit. We're going to start our weeks, and we're going to go to work. We're going to go to school, and we're going to have opportunities where we can be rude to people. And you say, well, they were rude to me. Forget about that. Be kind and courteous anyway, even if they are rude to you. Show them Jesus. And he wasn't rude. He was always kind and courteous. This morning, if we could serve you, if we could help you, if you have a need, we'll have a shepherd here waiting for you if you'll come. Together we stand and as we sing.